what is iOS at the high level? Like, how do you think about it? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, iOS is a funny acronym. I think actually as an industry, there's a couple competing acronyms, but at its core, really, iOS stands for Industrial Outdoor Storage, and effectively is low coverage industrial land. So yards, lay down yards, container storage, typically comprised of 15% or less building coverage, let's say, and where sort of the primary value in the property comes with the outside storage. And I would say it's a larger pool of these assets than I think most people think. They're the types of things that you drive by on highways and they sort of blend into the background. We think it's a pretty large space, actually.
Yeah. How does a gentleman like yourself, you probably didn't grow up thinking this is what I'm going to spend a lot of my career on. How did you actually get into this asset class? Because it's relatively new, and I know we're going to talk about how it's emerging, but how did you get here?
It is funny. I do joke about that a lot with my wife. But yeah, no. So originally, I still do work at, we have a firm called Abingdon Square Partners, which is based in New York. And we had been working in the self-storage space, actually ground up self-storage. And through that journey, you're looking for industrial zoned land, basically, to build self-storage. And through, looking for these sites in urban core locations, typically, we were seeing the need for, renting this land. In New York, it was to oftentimes fleet parking, truck parking operators. We saw this sort of explosion in demand and rents. And, we just saw that on the micro level in New York. And then, so we knew that was happening there. We heard of, some other groups that were, pursuing this as a discrete strategy. And this would have been the spring of 21. We did a deep dive, spent a couple weeks, mapped out what we knew about the space, called on a bunch of deals, talked to a bunch of brokers, and came away very bullish on the opportunity. We saw a space that was very fragmented, that was very large. We're sizing this at a couple $100 billion market in the US, which is actually not too far off from the self-storage market. And if you think about, where the self-storage market is at now, compared to where, outside storage is, really nascent asset class, we just thought that there is a really interesting opportunity to potentially get in on the early stages of what we think is maybe it's called the last frontier of industrial, real estate asset classes.
And to be fair, like, we've been buying industrial since 2016. We've always had some, yard space to the side. You always hear of kind of yard space, but from your perspective, when did this start kind of formalizing as its own asset class? And has this been something that's been being traded a lot in, call it, the previous decades? Or is this really kind of really started in COVID is when it really started popping? Like, if you had a timeline, how has this been maturing as an asset class?
It's a good question. Having now traveled around the country a bunch and talked to a lot of other operators, it's been around for a while. It's had different names. Some groups started doing this 10 years ago, other groups more recently, but certainly I think it was a confluence of a bunch of factors. I think definitely there's some e-commerce tailwind. So you saw really extreme rent spikes in certain submarkets. Yeah. You were talking, for outside storage, and again, just certain submarkets, rents doubling in a year. And when you see that sort of extreme, rent movement, that's going to draw the attention of, a lot of investors. And I don't know. I think it's sometimes it just takes a while for something to coalesce. I think some people that were early, it's hard to get capital on board with the idea, and it's sort of this virtuous or unvirtuous circle sometimes to get people interested in a space, and sort of brick by brick. And I honestly see it continuing on for another 5 to 10 years like this.